guest today is Mark Bailey. I'm delighted to have him here to explain the difference between two thought concepts. Mark, be my guest.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca and I share some things of a common heritage that pertain to religion. As the year started, we, not Rebecca and I, but we, the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, became aware that this was going to be one of those years, an election year, in which matters of religion and politics kind of spill back and forth. It's nobody's fault, but it's going to happen every time that there's an election. And one of the candidates for president had a supporter, a rather prominent Southern Baptist official, talk about the Latter-day Saints as belonging to a cult. He's free to say that because the Constitution allows him to say pretty much anything of that nature, but at the same time, I'm free to reply.
Of course,
I thought that would be a good idea.
We do have freedom of speech. Thank heaven this is the United States of America. So what's your reply, Mark?
Well, the term cult itself is one that's always a pejorative one. It's a negative one, and yet it's kind of vague. What is a cult, and how do you define it? My real purpose is just to kind of distinguish some things and make some simple points about the church that really everybody should know.
That don't apply to a cult, right?
Well, we hope they don't. Most of the times, cults are heavily centered on one person. They tend to not have great numbers of members, and typically they don't last for years and years.
Well, typically they're very coercive, and people don't have freedom of choice in a cult.
Well, once you join up, sometimes that's exactly the case. The church, as it was begun in the 1830s, was begun with one leader, Joseph Smith. And it's true that the members had to go through some pretty tough times before they finally settled in the West in what became Utah. But even beyond that, I just really wanted to make some basic points about the church. The first has to do with the name of the church itself. Really, we are just should be known by one name, and that is, we have one official name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is long and awkward and cumbersome, and it sort of begs for something else. And that's where the term Mormon comes from, which is a reference to the Book of Mormon. The church has no objection to its members being known as Mormons, and so you can call me one. Where they draw the line is that they would prefer that you use the full name when referring to the church itself, or if that it just isn't possible, you could say LDS, which stands for Latter-day Saints. But the Latter-day Saints are family people. We believe in having families and establishing families. We do a lot of work to try and make sure that families stay together, not only for this life, but in the next one. We're in complete agreement with all the studies that say that children grow up happier and more capable and more prepared to go on with life if they do it in a family. That's not taking anything away from all the single parents that are out there, but husbands and wives are the way God intended for families to exist in their best form.
Also, believing in family as a permanent thing, there should be a lot less divorce rate, right? There should be a lot closer family structure. Isn't the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints known for its family benefits and structure?
Well, we hope it is. Studies that have taken on the subject seem to indicate that divorce rates among Latter-day Saints are lower than in the population general. But of course, they happen, and one thing to point out is that right now, just under half of the church's members live in the United States. The other part of them, most of them, live in other parts of the world.
And we're talking specifically about modern day people from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The people that claim to call themselves fundamentalist Mormons do not belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do they?
We try to make that point to people over and over, but it seems to be a hard one for some to grasp, and maybe some people don't grasp it on purpose. I haven't lived in Utah, and so I don't have any personal experience that goes along with this, but I know that the church does everything they can to make sure that people don't claim membership in two different or many different organizations at the same time.
Well, also, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints wants their members to uphold the law. And they teach that you should uphold the law. And if they know that their members are not living church mandates, they will excommunicate them. Isn't that true?
That is true. You know, when the church membership left what's Illinois, I actually was Illinois then too, and headed out west, it was into territory that technically wasn't even in the United States, but the members then believed that they were within their rights to practice their religion.
Right.
When judgments came back from the United States courts to say that the practice of plural marriage wasn't constitutional, the church then made a declaration that no more plural marriages would be performed. Now that still left the problem of families that were already established and organized that way, and that was a difficult part of church history, but it was over 100 years ago, and so we're not in that situation anymore.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints signed the manifesto in 1890 to not live polygamy anymore because it was against the laws of the land.
Right, to discontinue the performance of plural marriages.
Yes.
Right.
And today, now, currently, it is not allowed and sanctioned or backed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They do abide by the laws of the land.
That's true, and it's even the case in countries in which polygamy might be legal.
The interesting thing is there are a lot of people that live polygamy, and because they want to, they decide to tell the world that they are fundamentalist Mormons and that they have a right to because they're the true Mormons. And they don't even belong to the church, do they?
No. No, the vast majority of them would not and never have. But of course, this is where we come up against the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion. What are we free to do as a church? Everyone would agree that a church that makes a practice of virginal sacrifice would be an illegal practice, and but plural marriage falls somewhere under that, but well outside the mainstream of common legal practice, for sure.
When someone in the audience screamed at Mitt Romney and accused him of being a member of a cult, they were referring to hearing about Warren Jeffs and Warren Jeffs going to prison and claiming that he was a fundamentalist Latter-day Saint, and he was not ever a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, ever, was he?
No, he wasn't, and of course people can say what they want, but comparing Mitt Romney to Warren Jeffs would be a little bit like comparing you and I to the Pope. Well, we have some things in common, but not so many you would say that we belong to the same church.
I think you do an injustice to Mitt Romney to compare him to Warren Jeffs in any way. There's no comparison because Warren Jeffs is a criminal and a con artist and a lot of negative things. And to abscond with the name of an organization he doesn't belong to, an identity theft, but he succeeded at that. I mean, look at the people that just blame the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now for being a cult because of this guy who's a criminal. He's in prison now.
Well, anybody who gives this stuff any study should not be taken in by that kind of ruse. But there we are, and here we are. I guess if we were to compare problems, having the FLDS out there, that's less of a problem than having weapons pointed your way, and we've been through that too. So we're better off now.
Maybe it depends on which FLDS. If you've got Warren Jeffs, they're pretty dangerous guys in their own way.
Well,
very destructive.
I'll take your word for that.
Well, look at the power they had just in that one statement being directed at Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's grandfather was a polygamist from Colonia Dublin in Mexico, and Mitt has said that publicly. However, that doesn't make Warren Jeffs a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't. It shouldn't carry over to Mitt Romney and whatever people think of him. I don't have anything to say against Mr. Romney. He's responsible for his own life and what he's done with it under lots of measures. He's a big success. Whether you want him to be president or not, well, that's another question. But he's certainly not guilty for anything that happened 100 years ago.
The second article of faith that is part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint belief says that man shall be punished for his own sins and not Adam's transgression. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't believe that you should be punished for what somebody did before you were even born.
Well, that's true, and I might explain the origin of this. A newspaper editor sent a letter to Joseph Smith asking for a concise statement of what the church believed. And his reply became what we refer to as the Articles of Faith. There are 13 of them. It's not a lengthy thing. It all fits on a page and a half. And as you mentioned, the second one says that men are punishable for their own sins, not for anything done by Adam or by anybody else.
Right. So, when it comes to polygamy of any kind, religion or not, the people that lived 2,000 years ago or 150 years ago are not responsible for the current behavior of those men, good, bad, or ugly, right?
Well, I'm lucky in that I don't have to make judgments about anybody, but from what I gather, there's an exploitive aspect about this practice as it takes place today that perhaps didn't exist 150 or 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. I have nothing to say about the the family life of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or of the other prophets of the Old Testament. All I know is what the law says today, what the church says today, and what our practice is today. I'm happily blessed to have been married to the same woman now for 39 years.
Well, the point being, the division is not in just faith or religion or the lack of it. What's happening is that the division comes down to human rights. And that's where the conflict is. There are people that use polygamy and other things as a violation of human rights. It has nothing to do with anybody that lived a long time ago. It's the violation of human rights that people are upset and concerned about. It's not who they sleep with. I think America has shown they don't care, really, They don't care who sleeps with who. They do care if they have to be responsible for it. They do care if they have to support all your children and pay all your medical needs for children that are illegitimate and unclaimed by their father. Isn't it true that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes that a man should provide for his children? Isn't there a biblical quote also that they embrace, that a man that does not provide for his child or children is worse than an infidel? Isn't that also part of the faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
That's an ideal situation, and I'm happy to say that many Latter-day Saint families fit right into that category. I'm one of the exceptions. My wife is the one who does all the work, brings home the money, and I take a Social Security check, and that's about it.
But you paid your dues by getting to the point where you could get the Social Security check. The point that I'm making is not that a woman can't contribute, but that we don't have children, not claim them, and leave them to the expense of the taxpayer. And there are so many quote unquote cult polygamists that do this. They call themselves Mormons, and then people assume that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the mainstream Mormon church, as it's also referred to, is responsible for that behavior. And that is not what they do. It is not what they teach. And their children, by and large, percentage-wise, there's exceptions, of course, we know that. But their children, by and large, are pretty responsible kids, comparatively speaking, to any faith, are they not?
Oh, all I know, Rebecca, is that within the church we want children to be loved, to be not just cared for day to day, but to be brought up to know they have a Heavenly Father who loves them, that following certain practices will make them happier than following other practices, that there are trials and trips out there that can happen to anyone, and that they'll be happier if they follow the teachings that come from their Heavenly Father and from their parents. We can't think of our children as being little economic units.
No.
They're not there to pick the fields or to provide us with some sort of supplemental government income. They're there to be served by us, their parents.
And that's a very responsible position for a parent to take. And that's the whole point. The responsibility of who you are as a parent is taught in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because it's family oriented. So the teachings embrace over and over in so many ways love, responsibility, education, wisdom, concern, humanitarian concern. That doesn't sound like a cult to me.
Well, thank you. If you were to visit any of our meetings, and by the way, here in Eureka, of course, we're kind of tucked in behind the hospital on the north end of Dole Beer. But if you were to attend any of our meetings, you could not fail to hear a message to parents, to husbands, to wives, how to make life better, how to make life happier, how to bring up the next generation to be happier.
And how to have peace and love in the home and solve problems with your heart and not your stick or your anger. I've heard some of those and I think they're beautiful. I don't think it sounds like a cult, but I have also got on the web, done my research, and pulled up stuff by Warren Jeffs, and it's just plain, it's worse than intimidating. It's coercive. It's totally coercive. A cult is defined by the fact that it takes the human rights away from the parishioner in the cult and gives them to the person who believes or pretends to be a surrogate god. And there are cults all over the United States that have formed little groups, and they're cults by that definition, and they call themselves fundamentalist Mormons. And then here comes Mitt Romney trying to go ahead with his life. And someone throws this really dirty ball at him. And what do you think about that, Mark?
Well, I can't disagree with you, but I guess if I were if I were in his shoes, and if I thought this was a big enough problem, maybe I wouldn't run for president in the first place. But all the candidates have certain things to overcome. And in his case, religion is something that could help him in certain places, and it might hurt him in a couple of others.
Well, my grandfather was a polygamist too. But I'm not responsible for my grandfather's behavior, right or wrong. And he did what he thought was being a good man. And I'm still not responsible, and I don't get any credit for it. And I don't get any shame for it.
Well, I think you do get credit for it. I mean, nobody's pounding on your door. Nobody's trying to repossess anything. Nobody's trying to put you in debtor's prison or anything like that. You're not on charges of fraud or anything. So
that's the point.
So you are credited.
That is the point. There's a level of integrity. There's a level of responsibility. There's a level of humanitarian rights, human rights, compassion, that is or isn't there with or without religion. With or without religion. It is there or it isn't there. I don't believe that the badge that you wear on your shirt, the badge, the name of your faith, is going to get you anywhere. It's what's in your heart. If you don't live it, you're not really there. You're not even there. So I don't think that counts. I think the issue is not polygamy or non-polygamy. The issue is, are there violations of human rights? Yes, there's legality involved, but if you come right down to it, the reason that we should not decriminalize polygamy, like Cody Brown wants us to on Sister Wives, the reality show, he's suing the government. Only in the United States can you sue your government for not obeying the laws. He's suing. But the point being, America doesn't care who you sleep with. They just don't want to pay for it. We are at a hard economic time. They don't want to support illegitimate children. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not condone having illegitimate children and not supporting them, or having any children and not supporting them. That's not part of the faith. That's not what a cult teaches. They're not a cult.
Well, thank you. You know, we can't put ourselves forward as better than other people, and I hope we never give that impression, because we're not. We have every kind of problem that people can think of. We've had it, we have it now, and we probably will have it. If we have any advantage over anybody else, we like to think it's having fewer excuses and having maybe a little bit of edge in terms of knowledge of what God asks us to do, and how we can become more like Him.
In other words, being loving and responsible.
We hope to be both of those. Yes, we do.
I acknowledge the fact that there are all kind of people in every religion, that you can't throw a blanket over them all and say they're all good, bad, or whatever, because it's not life. When it comes to the teachings of the faith, that determines what that faith is all about. The teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today, now. I don't know what happened 150 years ago. I wasn't there. And I'm not responsible for what happened, even if it was wonderful. Nor were you. But today, they are a family-oriented church that really tries to teach their children. And they've got some wonderful kids. All kids are wonderful, but their per capita ratio is pretty good. Pretty good in positive kids. In a cult, that's not the way it is. In the cult, you have a dysfunction where people are afraid to ask questions. They have blind obedience or suffer the consequences. They can't learn because they can't ask. A question unasked is a question unanswered. They cannot ask questions about what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do, because if they ask, they're disobedient. That's a cult.
So they're behind on the learning curve right from day one, and there's for something that they had nothing to do with.
That's very true, and it's really sad. I grew up in a cult. I grew up in a cult. And the educational system was pretty bad. Now, that didn't mean that we didn't get our little diploma, but that meant that if we took a test, we'd be in serious trouble. I learned to read. That was the mistake they made. I learned to read, and I'm very well read. But it's kind of funny because the normal concepts of the things that I should have learned, like history, I had to catch that up when I grew up, all by myself. Because the schools, while they were government funded, because the cult got land, organized, and became a corporation in the name of a church name, each little cult in polygamy, at least that claims to be fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, fundamentalist Mormons, has their own little bank account in their own little church name. And then they go out in the boonies and they colonize, and that's the way they keep everybody ignorant, because you're not associating with anybody else. And then they get government funding for schools and post offices and roads, and the guy that's leading the colony, puts his wives and children and all the guys to work, and if there's too many young men in the colony to make it so he can't get more young wives, he just runs them off. This is a cult. This is the modus operandi of war and death. This is the modus operandi of many and most polygamous cults. There's a difference. There's a difference.
Well, Rebecca, that's where you had the big advantage over me. My growing up was pretty white bread, ordinary.
The wonderful thing about it all is, when you come back to that second article of faith, I believe that. I don't believe I'm responsible for anything that happened before I was born, because I just won't accept that. It's not okay. It's a human rights violation. I'm just as an independent person. I believe in that principle. I'm not a member of your church, and I believe in that principle because it's right. I cannot be responsible for what happened before I was born. I just can't. It might be nice, but I can't rewrite history, and I can't fix it. But I can let everybody off the hook by telling them I'm not going to accept their excuse for that. It's not okay to commit a crime and blame it on somebody before you were born and say that's my excuse. It might be constitutional, but it doesn't make it right. There are no right ways to enslave anybody. There are no right ways to make people suffer. There are no right ways to take away people's rights, the same rights you want. I believe anybody that forces a lifestyle on somebody that they themselves wouldn't live, that's a big red flag. Hey, there's a problem.
Well, I'm with you all the way, Rebecca. To be absolutely honest now, our children are raised and grown, and they all live in other places. Not all of them believe the way we do today. That's a point of some regret, some sadness on our part, but at least we know that we can't force them into anything else, and we've kept the doors of communication open with them.
That's what really counts. You love them anyway. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks a lot.